Good afternoon and welcome to Invest in Incredible's presentation of effective communications. My name is Betsy Steiner. I'm the Director of Invest in Incredible here at Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Before I introduce our speaker, Christine Nickel, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about our format today. Everyone is muted, but we encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation. Just use the Q&A box to submit your questions. Most of you will find it near the bottom of your screen. If you scroll near the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll find a little Q&A icon. You just click that and submit your question. Or of course, you can use the chat. We'll be monitoring both of those. If you happen to get disconnected during the webinar, you'll be able to link on again or just log right back in using the link that was sent to you originally, so no worries about that. When we're finished later on today, you'll receive a brief survey. Your feedback is very important to you. We're interested in knowing what topics are important to you and what we might be able to present in the future that will be beneficial to you and your organization. So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Christine Nickel. Christine is a communications expert consulting for Gulf Coast's Invest in Incredible team, as well as through her own firm, Nickel Communications. Christine shares a wealth of experience and ideas from her work with nonprofits throughout our region, as well as her work with some of the nation's most prestigious corporations, including Pepsi and Johnson & Johnson. When she's not practicing the art of public relations and communications, you'll find her reporting on all things culinary for readers in our South Florida region. Christine, thank you for leading our session today. We're grateful for all of your good work. With that, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Betsy. What Betsy didn't tell you all is that we're both doing our own version of a high five because we're both Big Ten girls, and we're thrilled that our Michigan State Spartans will be playing very soon. But that aside, let me just welcome you all. I'm indeed very honored that you have taken time out of your busy day to join me in this presentation. The past 7 months have really been an unprecedented time for the world. For all of us, it has been a time of uncertainty, anxiety, now fatigue, and many other emotions. As this quote from the person who I believe was the most effective communicator of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, says, that we really don't know what we really don't know about what's going to happen going forward. So it's not our intention this afternoon to cover communications content. You all have unique content, but what we will cover and what I want to share with you are tactics that will make us all hopefully more effective communicators. I also want to stress what Betsy added about using the chat room, using the Q&A. I think we can all share from the questions or the comments that you might have. And again, I urge you to go ahead and not be shy. So let's get started. This afternoon, we're going to look at strategies and tactics and how crisis communication theory is applicable to us personally, to us professionally, and in preparation for our future. Many of you may be familiar with the principles of crisis or risk communication, and they are time-tested, based in research, and have been an effective approach for communicating in time of high concern or controversial situations for years. So these principles will be the foundation of what we're going to use today. So let's get started. Our first principle is that of mental noise theory. Basically, the mental noise theory says when you are upset, you have difficulty hearing and processing information. So just think about going into the doctor's office and having a terrible diagnosis, or picking up the phone and hearing that one of your loved ones has been in an accident, or thinking that a problem that we thought was, half a globe away is now in our own backyard. We shut down. Being human, we have difficulty hearing and processing threatening information. Take a guess on how severe that shutdown might be, and just note it in your chat function. Mental noise theory tells us that it can reduce our ability to process information up to 80%. That is amazing. But when you think about how much information that we are subjected to every day, and now especially how frightening it can be, our brains really do shut down to about 20% of what they can handle and retain. So the question becomes, how do we overcome limited attention? And how do we increase the retention of information in times of high stress, especially when our jobs are to communicate? That's when we move to the power of 3. The power of 3 says that if you limit the number of messages, 3 being max, and if you try to limit each message to maybe 10, 12, or 15 words, and if you repeat that message and stay on it, that this will help to cut through the clutter of mental noise. So if you start giving a long list of information, people just get lost and they simply tune out. And KISS, keeping it simple, really helps as well. Now, who has done this very well in the pandemic? The CDC has taken a lot of hits, but I would say that they have really applied this principle in a very effective way. We all know that we should wear our mask, wash our hands, and stay socially distant. Wear a mask, wash our hands, stay socially distant. We see this in the grocery store, we hear it on the radio, we see it on television. It is omnipresent around us, those 3 messages. They have taken hold. So our first foundational principle will allow us, the power of 3, to break through that mental noise. The second one is perception equals reality. As communicators, we must focus on how we can influence perceptions to create realities. Now, before I lose anyone here, think about how this happens in our world 24/7, crisis or no crisis. When we are communicating during this time of crisis, we have the ability to shape perception and reality. So how do we accomplish this in an ethical way? The way that we accomplish this is to present our information from a trusted source. We know that information from a trusted source is much more acceptable than information from one who is not trusted. So let's explore this whole concept of trust. The 4 components of trust are competence and expertise, dedication and commitment, honesty and openness, and caring and empathy. So let's take just a little moment to think about those 4 things. And again, decide which one you think makes someone more trustworthy, which of these elements in communication, and also put that in your chat box, if you will. So in creating trust, study after study after study tells us that caring and empathy are by far the most important thing that we can communicate. Will Rogers, who was another great communicator of the 20th century, said this amazing quote: "People want to know that you care before they care what you know." So important and critical in becoming that trusted source. Now, let me repeat that. People want to know that you care before they care what you know. And the other three elements of trust are about equally as important. Expertise, honesty, dedication, they all play a role, but the three of them equal caring and empathy. So how do we go to a statement of empathy and create someone being a trusted source of your messages? So to be a trusted source and to use empathy, you really must begin every conversation or presentation with a statement of empathy, followed by your key messages that will help you break through the clutter of mental noise. And that also goes for responding to constituents with questions, or in a Q&A, or certainly in an interview with the news media. So what does that sound like? You might remember that I began this presentation with empathy in regards to the anxiety and uncertainty that we all share. So some responses in a dialogue might sound like this: "That's a very important issue to me also." Or you might say, "I so care about that issue as well, and that's why I'm involved in FPRA." Or, "We are very much excited about that as well, and that's why my organization plans on doing thus and such." So you see, a statement of empathy creates a common bond. What else builds trust? Being honest with what you know and what you don't know. So don't ever be afraid to say, "I can't confirm that for you right now, but what I do know is," and pivot to your message. This is one of the most important tactics you need to perfect as a communicator at any time of crisis or any time. Imprint "but what I do know" on your brain, because it allows you to control the communication. For instance, last night I was surfing through a bunch of different news shows, and I bet "but what I do know" I heard 4 or 5 times. And then the speaker went on to insert their key message. So again, imprint "what I do know." And it does allow you to be honest about what you do or don't know. So here we are at a time when we're going to take those foundational principles and talk a little bit about how they might work into your personal communication plan. So it might be a good time, Betsy, if we have any questions, that we could address them now before we move on to the next phase.
Actually, I would keep going, because a couple of the questions that have come up, I think, will be addressed in your personal communication plan.
Okay, very well, very well. So let's talk about our personal communication plan. During this psychological earthquake of health fears, economic dread, the anxieties around our job, anxiety around our children, I could go on and on. So having a personal communication plan, in my mind, means how do we create a new normal for ourselves? Psychologists tell us that there are 2 things that ease trauma. And let's face it, things have been pretty traumatic of late. The first is to create a sense of control. And the second is to have a thoughtful plan of action. I want to tell you a little story. Some of you may know Tammy Hauser. She's an entrepreneur in Sarasota who decided that what we needed in Sarasota was a tour, a series of tours that you would access by trolley. She wanted it to be a really world-class experience, so she hired actors and actresses to be the tour guides. And Tammy was doing very well. In fact, she was at the top of TripAdvisor for what to do in Sarasota. So I think that speaks to her, her commitment to this business idea. She, of course, had to close down in the spring and was unable to reopen until June. So she reopened with all the safety precautions that she needed. And in order to get the word out, she invited Laura Finaldi. She pitched her on coming on a tour, hoping that Laura, who's a tourism reporter for the HT, would write a favorable review of the tour. So what Tammy could not control was her driver of the trolley that day, who, with another gig that he had, being a bus driver for Manatee County school system, had to have a COVID test, which came back positive. And he, in a very naive way, shared that with the people on the tour. So here's what Laura had to say in the article that she wrote about her experience on Tammy's tour the next day, well, actually the first week in August. Laura said, I could go on and on about the things that I learned. I was having so much fun that I honestly forgot about the coronavirus, even though it turns out that I had now been exposed to it. Devastating, right? Erasing all the positives about on and on about things she learned and how much fun she was having, but yeah, she got coronavirus on the tour. This is what Tammy did. She looked up every person who had taken that tour for the last 2 weeks, 14 days, and she called every one of them and said, she didn't think that they were in danger, but what she did know was that there was a potential and she wanted them to know about it. Most of those people were really grateful that Tammy let them know that. And then the driver found out that there was a false positive. So Tammy called them all back again and said, guess what? It was a false positive, nothing to worry about. And they loved Tammy for that. Everybody except Laura, who would not write a retraction. Damage done in a way, but it was certainly mitigated by Tammy's action and taking as much control as she could. So for our personal new normal, again, the two things that we should think about are what we can control and what is a well thought out plan of action.
Christine, I'd love to jump in here real quickly because I did have a question, and I bet other people would like to hear this again. Could you share the pillars of trust again?
Sure, certainly. Let me just pop back there. Okay, so the elements of trust are competence and expertise, dedication and commitment, honesty and openness, which speaks to our pivoting statement. I can't tell you that, but what I can tell you, and caring and empathy, which again, people care about more about what you're saying than, I'm sorry, I'm all mixed up, excuse me here. People care what you're saying when they know that you care. So those are the 4 elements. Did that answer that question, Betsy?
Yes, it did. Thank you. And I'll also let our viewers know that this will be available to view again through our I3Digital website, and I'll talk more about that at the end. But thank you for pausing and going back to that, Christine.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm happy to do that. So to jump back in to be talking about our personal plans for communication, I think it's really important for us to be appropriate to your mode of communication. And what do I mean by that? A one-on-one meeting in an office setting with a colleague or for some other opportunity in your mask is going to be entirely different than a Zoom meeting with, say, 10 people where we could see everyone, or even a Zoom meeting like this where we now have over 50 people. So you have to really get those rules of operation down pat. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the mask. We're all really hopefully honoring the mask, but what we need to think about is what kind of masks are appropriate. So I have here one of my favorite masks. Can you all see it? It's very sparkly. It says, it has 3 glasses of wine and it says, wine therapy. Now, I don't think anyone would take me very seriously if I was sitting across from you at your desk trying to consult with you on a communications problem if I had wine therapy on my mouth. Likewise, I consider myself to be very patriotic. However, I'm not going to wear this in a meeting either. I'm probably going to wear it on November 3rd, and the last time I wore it was on the 4th of July. In this photograph, Lindsay works for Tidewell, and Tidewell has a program which they are trying to increase awareness about called Blue Butterflies. So they had masks made, and in my mind, that is very appropriate. So another thing to think about when we're unmasking the mask is that when you have your mask on, you're really focusing on the top third of your face. And you have to think about, what is this top third of my face communicating? I once had a direct report who finally kind of broke down in a one-on-one and said, I feel so terrible. You seem to be so upset every time we're talking. You're always frowning. And the truth of the matter is, I am a frowner, and I've had to learn not to frown, but I explained to her that I frown when I'm listening intently to what someone is saying. So I would encourage you to think about, are you a frowner? Do you frown because you're listening? If so, what does that communicate to the person that you're talking to? Now, we've all heard that our eyes are the windows to our souls. So are yours warm? Are you blinking too much? Or as Tyra Banks would say, are you schmizing? And again, as we've already talked about, is your mask appropriate for the occasion? So what I would encourage you to do is put your mask on, go stand in front of a mirror and see, you know, go through different scenarios that you might be having personally. You know, am I smiling at the checkout person at Publix? Am I frowning at my 8-year-old because she's being naughty? I mean, think about all the things that you're doing in your mask and try to make the upper third of your face really communicate that in a meaningful way.
Christine, can I jump in with another question?
Yes, absolutely.
So in the interest of expressing caring and empathy, how important is it to avoid cliches, and how do you do it? You know, for example, throughout the pandemic, people have heard in these unprecedented times, and now more than ever, these things are true, but we've heard people say, oh my goodness, if I hear the word unprecedented one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. So what are your thoughts about cliches and how to avoid them?
Well, my thoughts about cliches are, unfortunately, we always seem to have one epidemic or another of a cliche. Unprecedented is very popular right now. Pivoting is popular. I think I'm going to say 3 or 4 times the word pivot in this particular presentation. So I think if cliches make you feel like you're being unauthentic, and certainly we all want to feel authentic, then find another word for that. Unprecedented, you can certainly say in a time like no other, or in a time like we've never experienced before. Or pivot, you could say switch to. I mean, take those words that you think make you feel like you're being unauthentic and develop your own vocabulary. That's how I would answer that question.
Great, thank you, Christine.
Okay, so talking about Zooming, eye contact is so important. And when you're on what's usually the norm for a Zoom call, maybe 5 to 10 people, I think when you're talking, you can maintain eye contact with everybody that you see in your thumbnails. And again, if you were in a meeting that was not virtual, you would be doing that because that is the effective way to communicate. So the second thing that I would say is on a Zoom, try to keep your hands above the waist and below your shoulders. You don't want any wild gestures going on, no jazz hands. And keep your hands when you're making gestures open palmed, not closed fist. That's always a very threatening gesture, but open palmed. And if you are so inclined and you're talking about something that's close to your heart, or you're expressing caring and empathy, put your hands over your heart. I think really people really appreciate knowing how deeply you might care about something. And the last thing that I would say is spend the $50 on Amazon and get a ring light. You really need to be well illuminated on Zoom. And I think all of you can probably recall meetings that you've been in where someone is in a dark shadow and they're just not in the meeting. So you need to be well illuminated to be able to have everybody recognize your presence and be part of that meeting. Okay? So let's talk about your professional plan with this information about communicating during a crisis. And I guess, Betsy, it would be another good time to break if there's anything that I could go over about personal plans.
I think we're good to keep going at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here's a little quiz. I recently ran across a study released in the Journal of Applied Psychology that looked at 4 different types of media, 4 different mediums. And I was really interested, of course, because after all, I'm sure you all learned this, I know I did in college, that the media is the message. So this study looked at email, telephone, video chat or Zoom, virtual kinds of communication, and face-to-face to determine what had the most impact and what was the most authentic medium. There we are talking about authenticity again. So face-to-face, of course, won hands down, especially for communicating emotions and authenticity. Interestingly enough, email was at the bottom of the list. It was seen as being inauthentic, unemotional, and not to be trusted. Again, unemotional, not able to communicate caring or empathy. Video chat was okay. This study was done just at the beginning of the pandemic. So I'm not sure that it represents the real effectiveness of video chat, but at the time of the study, this is what it found. The telephone, interestingly, came in second, and it was considered to be a way to actually leak emotions. And I want to stop with this for a moment, because I think for those of you who are really involved in the philanthropic part of your organization, you need to think about the telephone. I was recently talking with a friend of mine who's a major gift officer for a large nonprofit in our community. And she said, Christine, I spend 100% of my time on the telephone talking to our major donors. And I said, certainly you're not. I mean, are you pitching them on gifts right now? And she said, no, not at all. I am like their lifeline. And, you know, I really thought about that, because so many of our donors are, you know, people who are in the, you know, last quarter of their lives, or however we want to say that. And their reality in the pandemic is just shrinking because of their age, or perhaps underlying health conditions. They are really isolated in so many ways. And being able to reach out to them, to have a telephone relationship with them, to be able to say to them, you know, that last donation you gave us enabled us to feed 25 more families, or, you know, send 5 kids to opera camp, or whatever, I think is so spot on right now. And, you know, I also think it gives you opportunities to become closer to them. And if they ask you how you are, it also gives you an opportunity to reveal whatever you might want to reveal about your own personal life during this time of crisis. Or it also allows you to say, you know, that I am so proud of our organization. They've really done this, this, and this to make it better, not only for our mission, for the people who we impact in our mission, but also for our employees and our donors. Donors really want to have this information. So again, emotions leak out on the telephone, and it can be a very effective tool. Now, back to our poor last place winner, email. I believe that email does have benefits. And one of my favorite charities is the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Kanab, Utah. So we get several emails from them in the course of a month, and they're all very much like this, you know, these adorable cats. And it tells the story in a very narrative way about how these 2 cats found each other within the sanctuary at Best Friends, and you know, that their life was made so much better. And then after it reaches that arc, the arc of the story, then they ask you for money. Well, first they thank you. Thanks to you. Friendships like these are not unusual here at Best Friends. And then they ask you for another gift. I think that this type of email that tells a story can be very impactful. And you can get a good story in 3 paragraphs. Think of that. The second thing I wanted to comment about with email is that it can create community. My husband is a graduate of Northwestern Law, and he started telling me that he was getting these emails from Northwestern Law, like 2 or 3 of them a week. You know, join us for yoga. Here's a mindfulness seminar. We're having an alumni town hall meeting to discuss, you know, such and such. And then I love this one, join the Northwestern Law Summer Pop-Up Concert, which we did. We went out in our side yard, took our bottle of wine, and our computer and our Bose speakers, and we joined this great pop-up concert. So I think, again, you can use email in a very creative way to stay connected. And like Northwestern has done, really has gone a long way to build community around their alumni. So that brings me to this point, which I think is really critical for your professional communication plan, whether it's during a crisis or just normal times, whatever that may be. All of you need to be thinking about building your communication calendar. You simply have to identify all of your audiences and stakeholders and look at the various mediums in which you can communicate with them and plan a customized strategy around that. And I always like to have my communication calendar be on a monthly basis on a spreadsheet, you know, different stakeholders that I need to communicate with. What am I going to use in terms of communicating? What's the message? And how am I going to deliver that? And it really is a document that forces you to think strategically, forces you to plan what tactics you want to use, and then keeps a running record of what you're doing. So I really encourage you to do that. Also, I think that I would be remiss if I didn't say that these are times when you have to watch what you say. There really is a heightened eagerness to take offense at many, many things. This is a very egregious example. Niall Golightly, and I did not make up this name, this is really his name, Niall Golightly, was the senior VP of communications at Boeing. In 1987, 33 years ago, he, as a young fighter pilot in the Navy, said, and it was recorded in a document, that he didn't think women should be fighter pilots. Now, in 1987, that was not a controversial statement. Women were not allowed to be fighter pilots in the Navy or the Air Force. And so nobody really thought anything of it until fast forward 33 years later, when somebody dug that out and Boeing felt the need to reaffirm its gender policy, and Niall felt the need to resign, Reed be terminated. So the point here is that institutions do not want to court any type of controversy right now. They will avoid it at almost any cost. So please watch your words and use them very carefully.
Christine, I'd love to jump in here because we have a question that ties very nicely to what you've just talked about.
Okay.
And that is around perception equaling reality.
Yep.
And the notion of trusted sources. One of the difficulties in navigating the communication landscape today is that you can find the answer to just about anything you want. With a world of information, people are kind of pulling their preferred sources, which can, in effect, set up a personality-based or placed filter that inhibits the processing of messages. Are there any recommendations to communication experts to make sure that there isn't a personal filter put on information that's going out, especially with all the different, resources? You can find a resource for just about any opinion you have, but how do communications professionals deal with the issue of perception equaling reality and the notion of trusted sources?
That's a really excellent question, and I'm not sure that I can give you a pat answer to that. I will say that whoever asked this question is spot on. I mean, 24/7, we have a barrage of news that is coming to us from, many different sources, from, Don Lemon CNN to Tucker Carlson on Fox News, and people in between. And I think we all have our personal biases when it comes to how we interpret what's happening around us in our country, in our state, in our community, in the world. And so, there is certain filters that you're going to have. But when you're representing your organization, you have to create reality by leaving people with the perception that your organization is caring, that they do have empathy for the people that they're trying to serve, that in your statement of talking with them, that you do tell the truth, and that if something comes up that you don't know the answer to, that you will simply say, I can find the answer for that, or I don't know the answer. But then you always have the opportunity to get your message, which is your responsibility as a communicator, is to get your message across by, here's the word, pivoting to telling them what you do know. Again, by having an attitude of empathy and caring and being able to be honest about what you do or don't know, you have the opportunity to then tell them what you do know and deliver your message. So I hope that shuffles through that question as best that I can. So fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Okay. Watch what you do say. All right, be prepared. And perhaps this little story will help to clear up some of the questions that you have in your mind right now. This is a personal story. In 1999, when I was at Tropicana, it was discovered that a land swap that had happened back in the 60s between Tropicana and Manatee County had potential dire consequences. So at that time in the 60s, Tropicana bottled juices in glass. And they actually had a glass plant at the factory, a glass factory, I should say, within the plant. And at that time too, arsenic was a major component in glass. Tropicana had a landfill. That landfill was in East Bradenton. And they had, close to the plant, a wetland. Again, the 60s, when we weren't thinking about, saving our wetlands. But that wetland could be drained and would be the perfect spot for the new headquarters buildings. The swap was made. So fast forward to 1999. In that interim time, Manatee County had built a Head Start building and their program, you guessed it, on top of our old landfill. They were even going to build a new elementary school there. And in the course of doing soil sampling as part of their due diligence for constructing this elementary school, they discovered arsenic. So you can imagine what went through my mind when our environmental engineer called me and said, "You're not going to believe this. I need to come to your office." First of all, it was a potential horrible health risk. It was a huge, just a huge potential of an issue of social justice. East Bradenton is heavily African-American. So, all these children who were in Head Start programs and their teachers, potentially were exposed to this arsenic. It was a horrible potential problem for our brand. Pure Premium at that time was the #3 brand in the grocery store. Just a huge brand. So we had all of these things. But what we didn't have was a crisis communication plan. So I started thinking about what we were going to do, and I didn't have a crisis communication plan. And guess what? My boss was on his way to China. And did I really want to call up Pepsi and say, hey, we have exposed arsenic to, you know, a lot of children over the years, and do you have a crisis communication? I didn't want to do any of that. So what I did do was create a very small task force. We got our facts together as we knew them. We went to our CEO and explained to him the situation. And he said two things that have resonated with me ever since that. He said, we will do the right thing, whatever that is. And the second thing he said was, whatever it takes. So I immediately found out who was the environmental crisis communication expert in the country. And this wonderful professor from Columbia got an unexpected working vacation in Bradenton in February in 1999. The next 3 days were spent learning as much as we could about the situation, putting together our plan to communicate about it so that people would not be fearful, putting together the things that would help us to mitigate any worries or anxieties that they had, and keeping our fingers crossed that none of this information would leak to the media before we had our ducks in a row. So I'm still fortunate, still thanking my lucky stars that it didn't leak, that the communications plan went well, that we were able to test all of those children for arsenic. We were able to test anybody else in the community who wanted to be tested for arsenic. We did not have any positive reaction to that. We were able to tell our story in a meaningful way. And the icing on the cake for all of that 5 weeks of intense media scrutiny was that I hired a market research firm to find out exactly how did we manage Tropicana's reputation during this time. And again, thank my lucky stars, our reputation actually was heightened during this time. So my message to you is that you need to be prepared. Going forward from then, we thought about we tried to think of everything that could go wrong. Who would have known that something 30 years ago would have had that kind of implication? But we thought about what were our risks, and we had periodic table topics, actually, do a crisis as an exercise in all of our different plants around the country. So I would really encourage you to, first of all, do a risk assessment of what might happen in your organization, determine what your strategy would be around that, build your messages as best you can, and again, keep your messages to 3 and to the point. So to kind of wrap up here, I truly believe that you can influence reality in a very ethical way for your organization. Develop a trusted source within your organization who you feel is able to deliver messages in a caring and empathic way, because that is actually critical for people entrusting you. Along with that, honesty and openness reinforce empathy. So be honest. When you don't know something, again, pivot to what I do know and present your message. Use your media wisely. The medium is still the message. So build your communication calendars. Do a total calendar of who your stakeholders are, what are the strategies around messaging for that particular constituent, and build a calendar of when and how you're going to communicate with them. And practice. as our Tammy experience taught us, to find our new normal and to ease the trauma of our lives, try to take control of a situation and take well thought out action. It will be helpful. So I thank you all for being with us today. This has been great for me, and I'm happy to turn it back over to Betsy.
Oh, thank you, Christine, for a great presentation. You've certainly given us a lot to think about and a lot to consider. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to review any or all of this, you will find this on our website later this week. And please feel free to share this with your colleagues. Certainly a lot of good information and strategies to think about. So all of our resources for our nonprofit friends and partners throughout the region can be found at I3 at gulfcoastcf.org and at I3Digital. And certainly if any of you find that you need assistance from any of our Invest in Incredible consultants, whether it's around finance, fundraising, communications, strategic planning, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we do have cost-sharing grants that help our nonprofit partners build their capacity. So with that, thank you again, Christine, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and I will thank you in advance for completing the surveys that you'll receive following this webinar. Everybody have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.